I think that many of us, and you read his bestseller, international bestseller, The Reader. But maybe more important for this evening is that he's a professor of law and used to be a judge of constitutional court and still teaching the law at Humboldt University, is right? And so our debate will be more about politics and law than literature. So thank you for coming, and sit down, please. And I will start it with just, you're right, yesterday, but this afternoon wasn't planned, the program for the guest of this Central European Forum, but it happened, the demonstration on this square just next to us. And you were there. What was your feeling about that?
I was impressed. I was impressed by the crowd, and I'm impressed that a movement that started this spring is still strong after more than half year, and it seems to still grow, and I think that's wonderful.
Is this, is it in Germany a lot of these demonstrations? Are there?
We have demonstrations against the right-wing party, against the AfD. And what's really nice to see is that whenever the AfD or their friends and companions come up with a demonstration, there is a counter-demonstration that's bigger than the AfD demonstration.
And do you personally go for those events?
Sometimes, yeah.
Well, talking about this, this was the demonstrations about actually against the government and against the corruption. The demonstrations in Germany, I suppose, are against the right extremism, which is still not in government, luckily. What is now, how would you explain, or what is your impression from Germany, about Germany today? You as a man who lived through all this era in '68, anti-Nazism, education and all these kind of things, and then unification with Eastern Germany. How is the situation today? How would you describe it?
Difficult. It's difficult because the big parties are in decline. The Social Democrats, my party, even more than the Christian Democrats, and the rise of the right-wing party, the AfD, is troubling. And what's also troubling is that in the young generation, the generation of my students, I see a willingness to take responsibility, but it's responsibility for a forest that is in danger of being cut, or about a habitat of frogs, or whatever it is, nice things, but the willingness to engage in the political process is rather low. So the willingness to work in parties, to work in institutions and for institutions is rather low. They are individualists, and they find their special area of interest and responsibility, their single issue, but that's not enough for our democracy.
Do you think that maybe because they feel not threatened, because they feel so secure, that democracy is forever and something which is so natural because they are born in it, that they can't imagine they can collapse?
I think there's a danger that you enjoy freedom and democracy long enough, you may tend to not appreciate it as it deserves to be appreciated. You take it for granted. And you think you can turn your attention, your engagement to something, some hobby interest and hobby engagement.
Well, actually, we had the same problem, but now it seems that in Slovakia it's changing, that the young generation just years ago was very reluctant to talk and to engage even in politics. But we have seen the change, especially this year, maybe because of all these events when happened, the murder, etc., and corruption. So young people feel they have to be engaged, otherwise their lives will be worse. So probably still it's not that situation in Germany, but I mean the rise of AfD is for me surprising. It's quite a new phenomenon, and how do you explain that people forgot, those who vote for AfD must feel that these parties, right-wing or an extremist party, which is close to Nazism past, is it forgotten already?
Well, I think the rise of the AfD has many reasons. Misha talked about the polarization that he can observe everywhere, and of course he can also observe it in Germany. One reason is that our political mainstream has been rather narrow for the last decades. So you were against the euro, you already were out of the mainstream. You were against the rapid expansion of the European Union, already you fell out of the mainstream. So in a way we made our left and right-wing extremism by not allowing a bigger discussion within the mainstream. And then there is the AfD is particularly strong in what used to be East Germany. And also Misha talked about identity, and their GDR identity has been taken away, but they didn't arrive as full equals in United Germany that was dominated by West Germany. So it's also a longing for an identity that they find in a right-wing tradition, because right-wing tradition never had been as discredited, never has been discussed in the same intensity in East Germany as in West. East Germany had the idea it's something that doesn't have to do anything with us. We don't have to work it through. And so I think it has a bigger appeal for them than in the West.
I understand. So because Eastern Germany was not confronted with its past, because the communists just changed the narrative that they were not us, they were the others.
Yeah.
But still, 30 years later, Eastern Germany is still, I think AfD in Saxon 27% in the election. It was just horrible, because in Germany as such is about 12 or something. So it's a really big difference. And even the left extremists they're pretty popular in Eastern Germany. What happened? I mean, we can talk about the identity, but 30 years later, what went wrong? That this is still the question that Eastern Germans feel abandoned or less second category of citizens? Or why did it happen, and what went wrong in 90s when it started unification?
They have the feeling they have been taken over. They had their revolution, and then they were not, even though they didn't want it, they wanted to get under the roof of the Federal Republic as fast as possible, but they didn't realize that this meant that they don't have a chance to form something on their own. and the feeling that they are part of a Germany where the culture, the public discourse, the political discourse is the discourse of the Federal Republic, of the Old West, and they are not really part of it.
So it means that they feel that the West Germany imposed the values to the Eastern without asking them, or without not violently, but it's not natural in their feeling that they adapted these values?
Well, they feel they didn't have the chance to develop anything on their own. Maybe they would have developed exactly the same thing, but they couldn't do it themselves.
Well, because there is that's kind of explanation, but basically all Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, have faced the same problem of radicalization of society, more or less to the right-wing radicalization. It's not only immigration, but also these conservative values. So if Eastern Germans were not able to, and Germany as such was not able to make it, well, how could we, without the help of Western Germans, because we were alone? It's a question which can, the answer to this can explain the barrier between the West and the East, this crisis of identity or being abandoned, and how important or how dangerous it is, as you think, this division between West and East.
All the money that West Germany poured into East Germany was a blessing and a curse at the same time. It was a blessing because beautiful streets and the infrastructure was improved and houses were renovated. That was the blessing part. The curse part was we didn't do it with our own strength. It was given to us, and we weren't asked how we want to go about it. It was imposed. It was imposed in a paternalistic, well-intentioned way, but where were we? So this feeling is a feeling that you can find again and again.
So it means that it's psychological, more or less.
Psychology. It's also what used to be East Germany is still, there's poverty, there's more unemployment, and in the rural areas the infrastructure is worse than in the rural areas of Bavaria or Schleswig-Holstein. So there's some things that are not just psychological, but the psychological element is the most important one.
This previous panel was also about various things, but also about justice and sickness of that, and which we in this country face a lot. The trust into justice is the lowest in Europe, I think, and for very good reason. Our justice is corrupted, and we ask all the time, how did it come to that? This is in such shape. One of the reasons, which I'm not sure it's the truth, is that it's a kind of a post-communist development, because all of the judges from the past after 89 just followed their professions in democratic courts as nothing happened. What happened in Germany after 89 or 90 with judges from Eastern Germany?
Some were kept, the minority, particularly those who decided in family courts, family issues. And a judge in family issues, that's almost like a social worker often. And there the GDR was pretty good. Some were kept in civil law cases, but hardly anyone in criminal law cases. So
they were fired?
They were fired, and they could become practicing attorneys, many of them did. And Many found other legal jobs, but the judiciary wasn't that big in the GDR. I mean, one didn't go to court as frequently as one went to court in Western Germany.
And in terms of that, the justice itself in Eastern Germany works well?
Yeah, that's not an issue.
Yeah, that's not an issue.
No.
Well, Germany is for us, and I think for all Europe, still the symbol of stability and democratic hope for the rest of the Europe. When we see what is going on in Britain, which was Misha was talking about, or in USA, where we are actually witness of, I would say, almost a collapse of the democratic system, or political consensus at least, and the authoritarian tendencies. And there are two actually narratives. One is that, well, we shouldn't worry because the established democracies have so strong institutions that these are just moments we will just overcome and it will be fine. The other narrative is this is a big danger. Where do you stay in this debate? Do the institutions or can the institutions save democracy even if there is the attack from them, from the populists?
What I find frightening again and again when I think about it is 1933. How fast it went that the institutions collapsed. I mean, Germany thought that, okay, they were the Nazis and they never had a full majority, they almost had the majority, but we have our parties, our unions, our churches, our universities, our schools. We are on such thick and solid ice, and it broke within a couple of months. So I think never be too sure of your institutions. And I think our institutions are only as secure as we are willing to invest in them. I think our institutions need constant investments by our citizens.
Talking about that, how important among all the institutions in the state is a constitutional court? Where do you put it among those in the rank? How important is it? The most important institutions?
No, it's certainly not the most important institutions, but in the interplay of institutions, it plays a very important role. And I mean, the Constitutional Court is a fragile institution. They don't have a police force with which they can enforce their decisions. All they have is the word, the decision. And so the Constitutional Court only works if other institutions are willing to follow it. And so the Constitutional Court is always has to find a difficult balance between correcting the rest of the political system, but not correcting it in a way that makes the rest of the political system oppose to the point where they are not willing to follow its decisions anymore. And I think that's what our Federal Constitutional Court has always been very aware of. And so, just to give one example, we have two decisions on abortion. And while at first I envied the Americans who in Roe v. Wade went much further, much earlier than Germany, it never really brought peace on this issue to the United States. And we had two gradual decisions, and the Constitutional Court gradually led the political parties to accept that abortion should be basically legal. So the Constitutional Court has a difficult position.
Is it, I suppose you observe the situation in Eastern Europe and the attack on the Constitutional Court in Poland and Hungary. Why is it that the political class or the ruling class is one of the first institutions is to attack Constitutional Court? Do they understand that that's a way how to change the system?
They have to outmaneuver the Constitutional Court to change the system. I mean, the Constitutional Court would present them that it's unconstitutional what they are doing, and even if they have a majority, that's nothing that the government can hear well and easily. So yes, they have to outmaneuver the Constitutional Court to change the system.
How do you see the, talking about institutions, there was just a month ago, the European Court of Justice made or demands the Poland Supreme Court has to come back to the previous. I mean, the government made a decision. They wanted to actually to break the Supreme Court and to change the judges, and the ECJ pushed them to go back to that. Is that a role of European Court of Justice? Is it this institution which we can rely on that if it is something very bad, they can make it, they can bring in things to the order?
Well, I don't know whether they will always be successful, but we need the European Court of Justice to make sure that what the European Union accepts and builds upon as standards of justice and constitutionalism is respected by the member states. So it has to interfere, and I hope it will be respected with its interference. Once a member state should refuse to respect decisions, then I think we are close to the point of real division between that member state and the rest of the European Union.
We are in the country where it's not only justice, but especially constitutional court in a very bad shape. Maybe we have quite a good constitution. I can't judge it very much, but I think it's it's balanced. At least it's not bad. But the court is much worse than the constitution itself. And it seems to be intentional that our political parties and government, because now we in January, the court has to be, the majority of judges, they finish their period and they will be changed by the others, elected in parliament and then appointed by, nominated by president. But it seems that the political parties just try to postpone it, and it means that the court will be in deep crisis without the judges. Is there any, how could we respond on that? What happens if the politicians intentionally damage the court? What's the situation?
Well, what comes to my mind as a constitutional lawyer and constitutional historian is Bismarck's gap theory, developed in the 1860s, when an organ of the state that's supposed to do something just doesn't do it, then the Constitution doesn't say what has to happen, because the Constitution assumes the organ is doing what it's supposed to do. So there's a gap in the Constitution that doesn't answer what to do. And the business of the state can't stop. So in this case, the president would have to appoint them without them being suggested by Parliament.
Good. Thank you for the advice. Yes, but then would be...
I don't know whether he's strong enough politically to follow through with it. But this is something for which constitutional history and theory has answers.
There was a debate in this previous panel about abusing the law and the justice by suing the opponents. Well, we face it in Slovakia as well, especially journalists know it, but not only. Is it a phenomenon which is new? That, well, especially, I mean, the rich people sue because they have money for that, and damaging the citizens or the journalists and those who have no money for all these advocates and attorneys. Is that a new phenomenon? This one, I mean, the abusing this law, I mean, the justice and the against the citizens, which is threatening because, well, you have no defense if you haven't money.
Well, as Misha said, or it was whoever it was, the English libel law makes this particularly easy, and we don't have the same phenomenon in Germany. I mean, we have always situations where conflicts between labor and capital, then the union comes up with one attorney and capital comes up with 12. And the 12 write briefs with hundreds of pages, and the union attorney can just write one with 130 pages. So there is a lack of equilibrium. But what we learned in the last round about libel law, that's something very special. And I think you don't find it in France, certainly not in Germany.
Well, certainly in Slovakia, because we had many cases where even judges themselves sue the journalists and have won by the other judges who make the verdict to their favor, and the journalists had to pay, I mean, the papers a lot of money to the judges who felt threatened. I mean, they sued on bias of labor law. So, well, how is that? Can you remember anything like that? That the judge defend himself or herself in the court against the journalists, and then he wins? Is that something which we can say? Well, it's immoral from its crown, that it's something which cannot happen?
I would say the labor law is bad. I mean, a journalist, all you can expect from a journalist is that he researches what he writes carefully, and then he points out that what he writes is the result of such and such research. And under German law, that would be enough to protect him against any.
I understand. Well, but not in Slovak cases. Well, that's why actually Slovakia, in these terms of justice, is. Well, I even can't. I'm not sure that you can understand the situation that we are in the hands of justice and the judges. You cannot rely on law and truth because it's just abused by corruption and by the network of judges who are probably belong to the organized crime. What can be done with that?
What are you asking me? I mean, I hope there will be a new generation of law students who become lawyers, who don't just go into corporate law firms to make tons of money, or even go abroad to go into corporate law firms to make tons of money, but who see that this is a task that they have to take on. I mean, how else can it change other than with new prosecutors and new judges and young people who are willing to join the judiciary?
Well, we have a lawyer who is now chairman of parliament, and it appeared that his dissertation work, what it was for his title was completely copied from it was not just one original sentence. And he was young when he was 26, when he was just some 17 years ago.
This should be an upset not just for each and every citizen, but particularly for the universities, for academia, for the university where he wrote his dissertation. And I read, or you told me, that the university kept the dissertation secret?
Yeah.
I mean,
on the demand of this,
is a contribution to science and scholarship is a public enterprise. So a dissertation has to be publicly available.
Again, I mean, these politicians refuse to step down, refuse to resign, although we have a lot of examples from Germany as well, that when something like that comes out, so the politician just resigns. There are this famous Gutenberg case and the other one. What was the reaction in Germany about that? From political class or also from academic sphere? On that something like that happened? Well, but these politicians actually resigned immediately, wasn't there? Was no any defense from their part?
Gutenberg resigned almost immediately, and in the case of Schwan, it took a decision by a council at the university. So the university installed a council that had to go over the dissertation once more and decide whether it was plagiarized or whether it was just a sloppy way of quoting. And they decided it was more than just a sloppy way of quoting, and then it was clear she had to resign.
So basically, if political class, which seems the government and the coalition parties will not make this chairman of parliament to resign because of their interests, so what should be done? I mean, there is then is responsibility of the academicians and universities or students to press them to make a pressure on politicians.
Well, I think the pressure belongs not just onto the politician who seems just to refuse, but it should be on academia, and it should be on the university where he presented this dissertation. I mean, professors should refuse to communicate to the professors of the university. Students should make clear that they can't respect that university and that faculty anymore.
I remember when you had been here a couple of years ago, you mentioned this beautiful story of yourself at the university in '68 when the professors at the university also had closed their works and from students.
The books that they had written in the Third Reich. So
yes.
Our professors, they were locked away in the so-called poison closet, and one was allowed only to look at these books if one had some special scholarly interest that the head of the library then evaluated. Is this
and
special and serious?
And then the students revolted.
Yeah.
Is it truth? You were one of those who pushed the professors to open their works. Was it so? Which actually could be, if the students, which was not the case in Slovakia, if they pushed much more to the professors at the university, probably they would have to withdraw from their decisions. But there, in that case, was one of those which started actually the new era in Germany. Is it so? The student movement.
It was part of the change that we connect with the year 1968. I mean, it was much more than that, not just getting access to their books, but a few years before there had been the Auschwitz trial, and people began to ask their parents, what did you do during the Third Reich? So this getting access to the books was one element of this bigger movement.
Yeah, but thanks to students' courage and demanding on that openness, I mean, there was that. You are, as a professor of law, very, I mean, as far as I know, and it's also in your literature, actually, you think a lot about the penalty and the guilt. And I would like to ask you, what do you think about 89, which is now the anniversary? Because there are two attitudes. One was, we should have punished the politicians of communist regime, those responsible for murdering people and border and all these kind of pressuring those who represented the totalitarian system. In Slovakia, actually, almost nobody was in jail, and there was maybe some kind of trials, but never really finished at no penalty. What do you think? What should we have done? And in Eastern Germany, there were some trials like that. And did it help?
Yeah, there were trials, two categories of trials. There were trials against the border guards who had shot or attempted to shoot GDR citizens who wanted to escape. We had a couple of those. And then we had trials against high officials, some because they were accused of giving the order to shoot at the wall, and others because they had forged the elections. And all of these trials were somewhat dubious. I mean, the border guards had been ordered to do it, and the law allowed, now even required them to do it. So it was retroactive justice. And then the argument was, we do retroactive justice if the laws that then allowed or ordered them to do it were so unjust that they can't be really called laws anymore. But what they were finally punished with was then 1 year on probation, and this all didn't really fit together. And forging elections in the GDR, I mean, the elections never were fair, and so forging an unfair election. Okay, Honecker, before he had to go to prison, was allowed out of prison and then escaped to Chile. I think to deal with this past, the law was a rather weak force.
And you think that if it was stronger, that it would work? Do you believe in punishment as something which can make the society better, or better feeling in that there is some justice? Is that important in these cases?
I think in cases of regime change, and we are not talking about the Third Reich and the killing of millions. In the case of regime change, I think what was much more important and effective was opening the archives, opening the Stasi files completely. And to discredit these characters publicly is more effective than to bring them to court and then put them into prison for 2.5 years. So, total openness and investigations into the past and disclosure of files and archives, I think that's more important than trials.
Although you know that there was hectic debate about, I mean, Adam Michnik in Poland was deeply against opening the files, and so you are on the side of opening.
Yeah.
And what about the punishment of nowadays? We in Slovakia, I mean, one of the reasons why it's such a deep mistrust of the justice is that we know about a lot of corruption cases, and journalists write about that every day. And in the majority of cases, the investigation, was stopped by police saying nothing's happened. Is that one of the because when we talk about there are some examples like in Singapore and else that the only thing which can help to beat the corruption is to put the people in jail for that. Do you agree with that? That's the crucial thing, the punishment, that people finally recognize that yes, the state is able to punish the corruption. Is that important?
Oh, absolutely. I think corruption is a criminal offense and it has to be punished and people have to go to prison. The problem is, how do you bring your judiciary and your prosecutors and police officers to the point where they are willing to prosecute and convict corrupt politicians, administrators, and judges? But yes, of course, corruption is a criminal offense.
Well, we have that. I mean, now something slightly, changed to the better, but still, it's not. It's far from ideal. So I agree, but that's a problem. That again, when you have the judges who are corrupted and the police which is manipulated or under the order of the government, it's very difficult. Then, yeah, it's just and then. If you look
same story.
Yeah, it's the same story.
Are the young students willing to become, the lawyers are willing to become judges and prosecutors, and who is joining the police?
When you look at the Eastern Europe, or Central Eastern Europe, from German point of view, and it must be a kind of a disappointing view that these 30 years of democracies are actually now sometimes worse than 15 years ago. Except that we had been talking about this identity crisis, and do you see any other reasons why did that happen? Why did it happen that we are really in a situation when I personally think, well, I think that the state of democracy is now worse than 10 years ago. Is it? How do you see that? Is it a process which is a typical, kind of a up and down? So the future is fine. We just have to wait and work on that, or is it something more fundamental?
I think that. Okay, the situation in Germany, I think people enjoy freedom, the rule of law, and democracy, and take it for granted. And that leads to a decline because people don't take care of it and don't engage for it. And then the question is, will they turn around and understand that it's something they have to work for and engage for or not? I hope they will. And that is, I think, similar in other European states. Will they understand that there's something really at risk to the point that it can fail?
And is it not also kind of a battle with time, because maybe it's sometimes too late? I mean, how that the forces, people will wake up maybe too late and it's over, like in 30s in Germany. when you look at the development especially in the USA, for me it's just from us from Eastern Europe, it seems that all the guarantees of democracy, which were Britain and USA and Germany, of course, I mean, two of those collapsed in our eyes. I mean, they are Easternized. What we knew it, we know it from 90s when we have these almost authoritarian regimes. So it's just like copy of that what we have lived through in 90s, and now it happened in the countries which were for us. For generations, the symbol of stable democracy. Is it? Do you believe in this case in American strength of democracy for the future? Are you? I mean, how do you see the future of this, especially in USA? Because there is a battle. It will be also a legal battle with Supreme Court and the rule of law. Are you optimist?
What did he say? I hope. What else? And there are signs that one has reason to hope. So the resistance against Trump is organizing ever more. And even though I would have liked if they also had won the Senate, it was not very likely in the beginning, but it would have been wonderful at least they won the House. And I think they learn that they have to organize better. The Republicans, very well organized, took state after state, and the elections in the United States are organized and regulated within the states. So I think the Democrats and the NGOs and the groups, the resistance organizations, realize that they have to become more active, and they are becoming more active. So I hope they'll succeed. What else?
I give the floor to the audience, but I still have this in my mind. I know it's a question. It's probably you have answered it hundreds of times, but I would still like to ask: Is it as you as a writer? I mean, both of your professions as a writer and law has basically everything to do with the words, with the language. But is there anything other which can be common between the fiction as you write and between the law you are as a professor? Is there any link in your mind, in yourself, that you as a writer and lawyer can see it as something complementary in those two activities?
Well, there are issues of justice, moral issues that I'm writing about here and there. Not that I write about moral issues as such when I write stories, but the stories I'm interested in, to the point that I can write them, often entail moral issues that also concern me or engage me as a lawyer or legal philosopher. And I think here and there, words matter. And I think words really do matter. They are such a small power, but they are a small power and they matter.
So, I mean, there one hand. I don't see. Can anybody give the microphone there, or is it? Should I go there? It's just. There is no other microphone. Is it? Or I just go there? Ah, there is one.
Some people are voting AfD just because they want no Muslims in their city. And there is no another party that is promising this. Is there a solution?
Well, there was the AfD was. I understood that there is there popular because they want to get rid of Muslims, and there is no other party which is saying that. So the question was, is there any solution?
Well, I don't know whether there's a solution. There will be people who hate Muslims, and they won't disappear. But I think some voters for the AfD may go back to the Christian Democratic parties, CDU and CSU. They, under Merkel, moved very much to the left, and it looks like the successors of Merkel will move the party more to the right again. And just looking at Bavaria, where the AfD wasn't that strong because the CSU is still recognized as an established party that leans to the right, made them weaker. So I think once the Christian Democrats move to the right, then not the Muslim haters, but other AfD voters may move back to the Christian Democrats.
But the fact, actually, in Bavaria was clear that in Germany the issue of immigration is not anymore so strong as it used to be 2 years ago. Is it right?
Yeah. And Bavaria has dealt with the issue of immigration particularly well. I mean, Bavaria may be a conservative state, but it has a very well-functioning administration. And so they managed to deal with the problem of the income of refugees pretty well.
So there is another hand there in the back.
Good evening. What I think we are facing in a Western world or in all world, the democracy is, the representative democracy is eroding. And this is probably connected to many factors, some of them being also connected to the way we communicate. We transmit information, not only receive information. And there is also loud solutions like direct democracy, which are obvious and loud solutions. But what I would be interested is your opinion about deliberative democracy. Something like Ireland, the Citizens' Assembly, and people more deliberating and talking about solutions than just voting yes or no. Do you think that could be a solution to the erosion of representative democracy?
Well, there is a book, maybe you have that in mind, Against Voting, by a Dutch political scientist who said democracy in the old times in Athens and the Greek city-states was not democracies that worked through voting, but by ballot. So people were, by chance, put into the councils. And obviously they are experimenting with that in Holland, in Canada, and surprisingly, people just put together to solve a problem like making a plan for the city. They take it very seriously, they're very careful, and they come up with good results. So I think that may be built into our system more than we have it right now. Citizen participation could certainly be expanded, but I don't think it could replace the representative organs of democracy that we have.
Well, I would say in Slovakia, if you put the people in the parliament by chance, just by in lottery, it could be much better than it is. There is another hand.
Dobrý večer. Veľká Británia sa podľahla tlaku Good evening. It seems that the United Kingdom has fallen victim to Russian misinformation, and the decision was wrong. The decision of people was wrong. So this hybrid war is here, and I would like to ask you whether Germany is resistant to hybrid war and to misinformation coming from Russia.
Conspiracy media financed by Russians in hybrid war, and they failed in the battle with that. How is the situation in Germany? Is it more is it more able to fight with that, or the influence of these kind of Russian-inspired conspiracy webs are active in Germany?
We have them in Germany as well. Germany isn't as important as the United States, so probably the Russians don't focus on Germany as much as they focus on the United States. But we have them, and they are particularly effective among those Germans who emigrated from Russia during the 90s. And they, a little bit like the East Germans, they feel they haven't fully arrived in Germany. They still like to listen to Russian radio.
They were Germans by origin coming to Germany from Russia. Is it so?
Yes, in the 90s there were many.
But they were Germans by origin.
They were Germans by, Stalin moved them from the Volga to Kazakhstan, and then in the 90s, practically all of them emigrated from Kazakhstan to Germany, and many of them listen to this stuff and then are influenced by it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another. Is there any?
Dobrý večer. Ja by som sa chcel...
Good evening. I would like to ask you, what is your opinion when, for example, there is corruption, misusing EU funds, whether the EU should carry out the investigation, prosecution, and sentencing? So do you think this could be done at the EU level, or it must be done at the national level?
Money coming from European Union are stolen a lot of times. So the question is whether the European Union should have more institutions to control this money and to punish those who steal it, because until now it's almost no case of that. Well, we know that it should be a European prosecutor, but still, your opinion about that? It's European money which actually helps to corrupt our systems. Sorry, that's the reality.
Yeah, and Europe makes Orban's and Kaczynski's politics possible.
Exactly.
It's European money with which they buy the vote. So I meet more and more people who say, well, this has to stop, and if there's no other way, we have to throw them out of the European Union. But we all know that this is such a complicated procedure that one tries everything else before. And how weak the European Union is shows Romania. I mean, their corruption is rampant, and the European Union tried to support this special prosecutor's office, and it's a constant fight.
Yeah. I have the last question. It's my own. That's my right to. You are 74. You are actually, I would say, the luckiest generation in the history. You living in democracy, in peace. How do you feel about that, and what do you think the next generation will wait? Do you think that, which is now quite a big feeling, that the young generation will be worse off than yours was? What do you see? How do you see that for the future generation which come after you?
You are right. My generation was particularly lucky, and it begins with growing up. I still heard so many stories about the war that never having to go to war alone felt such a present and such a gift. And then I lived in times of growing prosperity, and I lived in times of growing freedom. And I had my personal worries, but I didn't have to worry about the state of the world. If someone would have asked me 10 years ago, do you believe in progress? I would have said, no, who believes in progress? But in fact, I did. I thought the world had gotten better and better, and even the Cold War had ended, and Germany was reunited, and the global world seemed to be a world that grows together. So yeah, I lived a lucky life. And how it will go, it will be certainly more difficult for the next generation. I don't foresee a war in Europe, that I don't see, but I can see times where the scissors between rich and poor open even more, times with more poverty, times with unemployment again, times with less freedom, and I could only, in my teaching, try to encourage my students to fight against these tendencies as well as they can.
Yeah, and I think we needed you still very much, your generation. And thank you very much for this wonderful debate. Thank you.